The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, but I didn't hear it break. I couldn't hear anything over the roaring in my ears, the sound of my entire world collapsing into itself like a dying star. My hands were trembling so violently that I had to press them against my thighs to keep them still, to keep myself from screaming, from tearing down the silk curtains of this penthouse I had helped him afford with my own 2 hands. Through the bedroom door, slightly ajar, I watched him. Caelum Draven, the man I had loved for 7 years, the man I had given my youth, my loyalty, my entire heart to, the man who, at this very moment, had his hands tangled in my sister's copper-red hair, pulling her closer, kissing her with the kind of desperate hunger he hadn't shown me in years. And Isolde, my baby sister, the girl I had protected from schoolyard bullies, the woman I had lent money to when she couldn't make rent, the sister I had defended to our parents when they called her irresponsible. She was wrapped around him like a vine, wearing the silk robe I had given her for her birthday. In my own bed, in the apartment I paid half the rent for. I should have screamed. I should have burst through that door and demanded an explanation. I should have thrown things, cursed, cried. But instead, I just stood there, frozen, watching the 2 people I trusted most in this world betray me in the most intimate way possible. And the worst part? They were laughing. Soft, conspiratorial laughter. The kind of laughter that told me this wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake fueled by alcohol or a moment of weakness. This was comfortable. This was practiced. This was something that had been happening behind my back for God knows how long. 3 weeks. That's how long I had been working 18-hour days to close the biggest deal of my career. 3 weeks of sleeping at my desk, surviving on cold coffee and pure determination. 3 weeks of missing his calls and promising I'd make it up to him. I came home early to surprise him, carrying a bottle of his favorite wine and a heart full of guilt for neglecting our relationship. What a fool I was. Now, I need you to understand something. I'm telling you this story not for your pity, but because what comes next, what I did after I walked out of that apartment with my dignity barely intact, that's the part you need to hear. That's the part that changed everything. But before I continue, I need to know something. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. I want to know just how far this story is going to travel. And while you're there, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you're going to want to be here for how this ends. Because the woman standing in that hallway, dying inside while her world burned, she didn't stay broken. She became something else entirely. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Seraphina Vance. Most people call me Sera. I'm the eldest daughter of Victor and Helena Vance, born and raised in a modest house on the edge of a city that never seemed to have room for people like us. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. My father worked double shifts at a manufacturing plant, and my mother cleaned houses for families who had more money than they knew what to do with. From a young age, I understood something fundamental about the world. Nobody was going to hand me anything. If I wanted to escape the cycle of paycheck-to-paycheck living that had trapped my parents, I would have to claw my way out with my bare hands. So that's exactly what I did. I was the kid who stayed up until 3 a.m. studying for exams while my classmates partied. I was the teenager who worked 2 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. I was the college student who graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance, while my peers accumulated debt and regrets. Isolde was different. 4 years younger than me, she had always been the beautiful one, the charming one, the one who could smile her way out of any trouble. where I had to work for everything, things seemed to fall into Isolde's lap. She was Daddy's princess and Mama's baby girl, and I was the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who would always be okay because, well, Sera always figures it out, doesn't she? I met Caelum during my junior year of college. He was a business major with movie star looks and ambitions that matched my own. At least, that's what he told me. He spoke of building empires, of changing industries, of leaving a legacy. And I, hungry for someone who understood my drive, fell completely and utterly in love. We started dating, then moved in together after graduation. I got a job at Whitmore Capital, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the country, starting as an analyst and working my way up with the kind of ferocity that made my colleagues nervous. Caelum started his own tech company, a startup focused on developing AI solutions for small businesses. I believed in his vision so much that I invested my entire savings into his dream. $60,000. Every penny I had scraped together over years of sacrifice. I also used my connections at Whitmore to introduce him to investors, to open doors that would have remained firmly closed otherwise. I edited his pitch decks, practiced his presentations with him, held him through the rejections, and celebrated the small victories. His dream became my dream. His success became my obsession. And while I was busy building his future, he was busy falling for my sister. I didn't see it happening. How could I? I was too focused on the next deal, the next client, the next step up the ladder. When Isolde lost her job as a boutique sales associate, I was the one who suggested Caelum hire her as his office manager. She needed work, he needed help. It was perfect. Perfect for them, as it turned out. Later, I would piece together the timeline from overheard conversations and discovered text messages. It started with lingering looks in the office, then drinks after work to discuss business that somehow never got discussed, then late nights when I was stuck at the office, too tired to answer his calls, then my bed. For 8 months, they had been carrying on behind my back. 8 months of lies and excuses and fabricated business trips. 8 months of Isolde looking me in the eye at family dinners while knowing what she had done. 8 months of Caelum kissing me goodbye in the morning with the taste of my sister still on his lips. The night I discovered them, I didn't confront them. I couldn't. My body moved on autopilot, backing away from that door, grabbing my bag from the couch, and walking out of the apartment as quietly as I had entered. The bottle of wine I had been carrying, I left it on the kitchen counter. A gift for the happy couple. I walked for hours through the city streets, numb and disconnected from my own body. The glittering lights of skyscrapers seemed to mock me. All that success and ambition that suddenly felt meaningless. What was the point of climbing the ladder if there was no one to share the view with? What was the point of building a life if the foundation was made of lies? I ended up at Talia's apartment at 2 a.m, mascara streaked down my face, my expensive heels destroyed from walking. Talia Brennan had been my best friend since the first day of our MBA program. She was the only person in the world who I trusted with my complete truth, the only one who had ever seen me vulnerable. She opened the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside without a word. She made tea that I didn't drink, offered wine that I couldn't stomach, and finally just sat beside me on the couch, holding my hand while I stared at nothing. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Hollow. Dead. I told her everything. The surprise, the door, the laughter, Isolde's hair in his hands, the 8 months, the betrayal. Every word felt like pulling shards of glass from my chest, but I got it all out, every ugly detail, until there was nothing left inside me but a vast, echoing emptiness. Talia listened without interrupting. When I was done, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she squeezed my hand and said something I will never forget. She said, "Sera, you have two choices right now. You can let this destroy you, or you can let this destroy them." At that moment, I didn't understand what she meant. I was too wrapped up in my pain to see anything beyond the immediate devastation. But her words planted a seed, a small, dark seed that would grow into something powerful over the coming months. That night, sleeping fitfully on Talia's couch, I had a dream. I was standing at the top of a glass tower, looking down at Caelum and Isolde, who were tiny figures far below, looking up at me with expressions of disbelief and fear. In the dream, I wasn't crying. I wasn't broken. I was smiling. When I woke up, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I didn't cry. I had done enough of that the night before, soaking Talia's throw pillows with my tears until there was nothing left. Instead, I sat at her kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and made a list. I had always been good at lists. They helped me organize the chaos of life into manageable pieces, turning overwhelming problems into solvable equations. So that's what I did. I made a list of everything I had given to Caelum Draven over the past 7 years. $60,000 in direct investment, countless hours of free consulting, introduction to at least 15 major investors, 3 of whom had put money into his company, references, recommendations, and endorsements that had opened doors across the industry, emotional support, domestic labor, and the kind of unconditional love that he had clearly never deserved. Looking at that list, something inside me shifted. The grief that had been crushing my chest began to crystallize into something harder, something colder, something far more dangerous. Anger. I called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. Leonora Whitmore, the formidable CEO who had taken me under her wing, would not be pleased. But I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out my next move. The first step was obvious. I had to leave the apartment. I couldn't go back there. Couldn't sleep in that bed. Couldn't look at those walls without seeing their shadows moving behind that door. So I called our landlord and removed myself from the lease. Caelum could figure out how to pay the full rent himself. Good luck with that, considering his company was still struggling to turn a profit. Then I went to the bank and changed all my account information. We had kept our finances mostly separate, thank God, but Caelum had access to my emergency savings account in case something happened to me. Not anymore. With each practical step, I felt a little more of myself returning. Not the lovesick woman who had devoted herself to a man who didn't deserve her, but something older, something I had buried in my attempts to be the perfect partner. The driven, calculating, ruthlessly ambitious woman who had gotten me to where I was in the first place. Thalia helped me find a new apartment, a sleek studio in a high-rise that I could barely afford but desperately needed. It was mine and mine alone, with clean white walls and huge windows that looked out over the city like a promise. I didn't hear from Caelum for 3 days. 3 days. That's how long it took him to notice that my clothes were gone from the closet, that my toiletries had vanished from the bathroom, that the woman he had claimed to love for 7 years had disappeared from his life. When he finally called, I was in the middle of a meeting with a potential client worth $40 million. I looked at his name on my screen, felt my heart lurch painfully in my chest, and declined the call. Then I returned my attention to the client, with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Later that evening, I listened to his voicemail. His voice was confused, concerned, almost annoyed. "Hey, babe, where are you? I came home and all your stuff is gone. Did I miss something? Call me back." Did he miss something? The audacity of it made me want to laugh. Or scream. I couldn't decide which. I didn't call him back. Instead, I sent a single text message. "I know about Isolde. Don't contact me again." The aftermath of that text was almost entertaining. My phone exploded with calls and messages. Caelum, panicked and desperate, claiming it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that he loved me and only me. Isolde, tearful and apologetic, begging me to let her explain. Even my mother, who had somehow gotten wind of the situation, called to ask what was going on between her daughters. I didn't respond to any of them. I blocked Caelum's number, muted Isolde's messages, and told my mother that I would explain when I was ready. Then I threw myself into my work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. For the next 3 months, I barely came up for air. I arrived at the office before dawn and left well after midnight. I took on projects that no one else wanted, pursued clients that everyone else had given up on, and delivered results that made my colleagues' jaws drop. I became a machine, ruthlessly efficient, emotionally impenetrable. Leonora noticed, of course. She had built Whitmore Capital from nothing, and she recognized the particular kind of drive that came from pain. One evening, when I was the only one left in the office, she appeared at my desk with 2 glasses of scotch. She said, "Whoever he is, he's not worth destroying yourself over." I looked up at her. This woman who had shattered glass ceilings and built an empire in a world designed to keep her out. And I felt something crack inside me. Not the hard shell I had constructed around myself, but something deeper. Something that needed to break. "I didn't destroy myself," I told her. "But I'm not sure I'm putting myself back together right either." Leonora sat down across from me and studied my face with those sharp eyes that had intimidated CEOs and politicians alike. Then she said something that would change the trajectory of my life. She said, "The best revenge, Seraphina, isn't living well. It's winning completely. And you have the talent to do exactly that. The question is whether you have the stomach for it." I asked her what she meant. She leaned forward, swirling the scotch in her glass. She said, "I've been watching you since the day you walked into this firm. You're smarter than most of the senior partners, and you work harder than anyone I've ever seen. But you've been holding yourself back, playing it safe, trying to be likable rather than powerful." She paused, her eyes boring into mine. "I have a proposition for you, a project that could make your career. But it's going to require you to become someone new, someone harder. Are you interested?" I thought about Caelum and Isolde, about the betrayal, about the pain that still woke me up at 3 a.m, clawing at my chest. Then I thought about Thalia's words the night I had shown up at her door, broken and bleeding. "You can let this destroy you, or you can let this destroy them." "Yes," I said. "I'm interested." Leonora smiled, and it was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. The project was called Prometheus. It was Whitmore Capital's most ambitious initiative in years, a plan to acquire and restructure a portfolio of failing tech companies, turning them into profitable enterprises. The total value of the companies involved was in the billions, and success would cement Whitmore's position as the most powerful investment firm in the country. But what made me sit up straight, what made my heart pound with something that wasn't quite rage and wasn't quite excitement, was one of the names on the acquisition list. Draven Technologies, Caelum's company. I stared at the name on the document, my mind racing. Caelum's startup had been struggling for years, surviving on investor money and broken promises. I knew this because I had been the one managing his finances, reviewing his quarterly reports, trying to find ways to keep his dream alive. What I hadn't known, what Leonora revealed to me that night, was just how bad things had gotten. Draven Technologies was hemorrhaging money, and several of its key investors were looking to pull out. Without a significant cash injection or a buyer willing to take on the debt, the company would collapse within 6 months. And Whitmore Capital was positioning itself to be that buyer. I should have recused myself. I should have disclosed my personal connection to the company and stepped away from the project. That would have been the ethical thing to do, the professional thing. But I wasn't feeling particularly ethical or professional. I was feeling something else entirely. Something cold and patient and hungry. So I looked Leonora in the eye and asked her what she needed me to do. Over the next few months, I transformed. The woman who had given 7 years of her life to a man who didn't deserve her was gone, replaced by someone sharper, more calculated, more dangerous. I learned the art of the hostile takeover. I studied negotiation tactics that bordered on psychological warfare. I discovered reserves of ambition within myself that I hadn't known existed. And I watched Draven Technologies slowly crumble, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. 6 months after I walked out of that apartment, I barely recognized myself. The woman who stared back at me from the mirror each morning had cheekbones sharpened by missed meals and eyes that held a calculating coldness. I had lost weight, gained power, and shed every ounce of softness that had once made me vulnerable. My colleagues at Whitmore Capital had started calling me the Ice Queen behind my back. I knew this because I made it my business to know everything. Information was currency, and I had become a ruthless collector. The Prometheus project was progressing exactly as planned. 3 of the 5 target companies had already been acquired, their struggling operations absorbed into Whitmore's vast portfolio. The 4th was in the final stages of negotiation. That left only one name on my list: Draven Technologies. I had waited, biding my time, watching Caelum's company spiral closer and closer to disaster. Every failed product launch, every departing employee, every investor who quietly withdrew their support. I cataloged them all, adding them to the dossier that I reviewed each night before bed. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had once spent my evenings helping Caelum solve these exact problems, offering advice and connections and resources that he had accepted without question. Now I spent them watching those problems multiply, knowing that I could have helped, but choosing not to. Some nights, when the guilt crept in around the edges of my carefully constructed armor, I would pull out my phone and scroll through old photos. Caelum and me on our first anniversary, smiling in front of the restaurant where he had told me he loved me. Isolde and me as children, building sandcastles on a beach, our faces lit up with uncomplicated joy. A family portrait from last Christmas, my parents beaming, unaware that their eldest daughter was dying inside while their youngest was sleeping with my partner. Those were the nights when I questioned everything. Was I becoming someone I didn't want to be? Had the betrayal corrupted me in ways I couldn't see? Was revenge worth the cost of my own soul? And now I want to pause and ask you something. Because this moment in my story, this crossroads, is something I think we've all faced in one form or another. When someone you love betrays you, when the pain is so deep it feels like it will never heal, what do you do? Do you let it go and move on, trusting that karma will eventually balance the scales? Or do you take matters into your own hands, even if it means becoming someone you never imagined? I genuinely want to know. Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have walked away? Or would you have stayed to watch them fall? Because I stayed. God help me, I stayed. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 7 months after I had discovered the affair. I was in my office, reviewing the quarterly earnings reports for our portfolio companies, when Thalia burst through the door without knocking. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide with something between excitement and concern. She was holding her phone like it was a live grenade, and she was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Sera," she said, her voice slightly breathless, "you need to see this." She handed me her phone. On the screen was a social media post from an account I had blocked months ago. Isolde's account. It was a photo of my sister's hand, a massive diamond ring glittering on her fourth finger. The caption read, "She said yes, I'm going to be Mrs. Draven." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The air had been sucked from the room, and I was drowning in a vacuum of disbelief and rage. It wasn't the engagement itself that broke me. I had long since accepted that Caelum and Isolde would continue their relationship. People who betray together tend to stay together, at least for a while. What shattered the last remnants of my restraint was the timing. 7 months. He had waited exactly 7 months, the length of a respectable mourning period, before proposing to my sister. As if our 7-year relationship was a footnote in his history, easily forgotten, quickly replaced. And the ring. I recognized that ring. It was the same design I had once shown Caelum in a jewelry store window, pointing it out as my dream engagement ring. The ring he had promised to buy me someday, when his company finally took off, when we had made it together. He had bought my ring for my sister. Something inside me, something that had been struggling to hold on to the possibility of forgiveness, finally died. In its place, a cold certainty settled into my bones. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice. I handed Thalia's phone back to her and looked up at my best friend with eyes that had gone completely flat. "How long until the Draven Technologies acquisition is ready?" I asked. Thalia had been briefed on my involvement in the Prometheus project months ago. She was the only person outside of Whitmore Capital who knew what I was planning. Her expression shifted as she understood what I was really asking. "Legal says we can make the offer next week," she replied carefully. "But, Sera, are you sure about this? Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back." I thought about Caelum's hands in Isolde's hair. I thought about 8 months of lies. I thought about my ring on my sister's finger. "Schedule the meeting," I said. "I want to be there when we make the offer." The next few days passed in a blur of legal documents, strategic planning, and carefully choreographed meetings. Leonora, who had become something of a mentor to me over the past months, watched my preparations with a mixture of approval and something that might have been concern. On the morning of the acquisition meeting, she called me into her office. "You know what you're doing," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She studied me for a long moment. "And you're prepared for the consequences? Personal and professional?" I met her gaze without flinching. "I've been preparing for this for 7 months. I know exactly what I'm doing." Leonora nodded slowly. Then she said something that surprised me. "I was in your position once. many years ago. The specifics were different, but the betrayal was the same. I built this company on the ashes of what he burned down. She paused, and for just a moment I saw something vulnerable in her eyes. Just make sure, Seraphina, that when you're done, you still recognize the woman in the mirror. Victory means nothing if you lose yourself in the winning. I nodded, accepting her wisdom even as I filed it away for later consideration. Right now, I couldn't afford to be introspective. Right now, I needed to be sharp. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the offices of Draven Technologies. I arrived at 9:30, dressed in a charcoal gray power suit that probably cost more than Caelum's monthly rent. My hair was pulled back in a severe bun, my makeup flawless, my expression carefully neutral. I was ready. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when the conference room doors opened and I came face to face with Caelum Draven for the first time in 7 months. He looked tired, I noticed. Older than I remembered. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled. The confident, charismatic man I had fallen in love with had been replaced by someone who looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Good. He should be tired. He should be struggling. His world was about to collapse. But then his eyes found me, and for just a moment I saw a flicker of the old Caelum, the man who had made me laugh, who had held me through difficult times, who had promised me forever. Sera? His voice cracked on my name. I felt something twist in my chest, some remnant of the love I had tried so hard to bury. But I pushed it down ruthlessly, locking it away in the deepest part of myself. When I spoke, my voice was cold enough to freeze the air between us. Mr. Draven, I said, I believe we have business to discuss. The conference room went deathly silent. I watched the color drain from Caelum's face as the reality of the situation began to dawn on him. His gaze darted between me and the team of lawyers and executives I had brought with me, trying to make sense of what was happening. Sera, what is this? His voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. Instead, I took my seat at the head of the conference table, a position that had clearly been reserved for him, and gestured for my team to distribute the acquisition documents. My name is Seraphina Vance, I said, addressing the room with the kind of cold professionalism I had perfected over the past months. I'm the lead acquisition specialist for the Prometheus project at Whitmore Capital. We're here to present an offer for the purchase of Draven Technologies. Caelum was still staring at me like he had seen a ghost. You work for Whitmore Capital? Since when? Since before I met you, I replied smoothly. I was already an analyst there when we started dating. You just never bothered to remember the details of my career. Too busy talking about your own. The barb landed exactly as intended. I saw him flinch, saw the first flicker of shame in his eyes. But this was only the beginning. Over the next hour, I presented the acquisition offer with surgical precision. I laid out every financial failure of Draven Technologies, every missed deadline, every broken promise to investors. I had the receipts for everything. The declining revenue, the departing talent, the mounting debt that Caelum had been desperately trying to hide. By the time I finished, the other members of Draven's board were looking at their CEO with a mixture of shock and accusation. They hadn't known how bad things had gotten. Caelum had been keeping secrets from everyone, it seemed. But then came the plot twist, the moment that changed everything. As Caelum's chief financial officer was frantically flipping through the documents trying to find some error, some loophole we might have missed, he suddenly went very still. These investment records, he said slowly, looking at Caelum with growing disbelief. The initial seed funding from 6 years ago. He turned to look at me. This shows that the primary investor was Vance Holdings. That's you, isn't it? I allowed myself a small smile. It was the first genuine emotion I had shown since entering the room. Actually, I said, Vance Holdings is a family trust established by my grandmother. When I invested $60,000 in Draven Technologies 6 years ago, the money was processed through that trust for tax purposes, which means that technically, I've been a significant stakeholder in this company since its inception. The room erupted. Board members started talking over each other. Lawyers began frantically reviewing documents, and Caelum just sat there, frozen, as the magnitude of what I was saying sank in. You see, I had done something that Caelum had never expected. I had read the fine print. When I had invested in his company all those years ago, blinded by love and eager to support his dreams, I hadn't just handed over cash. The investment agreement, which Caelum had clearly never bothered to fully read, included provisions that gave me significant rights as a stakeholder. Rights that he had never exercised, but that I had very carefully maintained. Combined with the additional shares that Whitmore Capital had been quietly purchasing over the past few months, we now controlled a majority stake in Draven Technologies. We didn't need Caelum's approval to proceed with the acquisition. We already owned his company. The expression on his face when this reality hit him was something I will carry with me forever. It was the look of a man who had thought he was playing chess, only to realize he had been playing checkers, while I was playing a game he didn't even know existed. This isn't possible, he said, his voice hoarse. You can't do this. I built this company from nothing. Actually, I corrected him, you built this company with my money, my connections, and my expertise. I just never received proper credit for my contributions. Until now. I stood up, smoothing my jacket, and looked around the room at the shell-shocked faces of his board members. Effective immediately, I announced. Whitmore Capital is assuming control of Draven Technologies. As the majority stakeholder, I am exercising my right to restructure the leadership team. She paused, letting the words sink in. Mr. Draven, your services as CEO are no longer required. Please clear out your office by end of business today. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Caelum stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and for a moment I thought he might try something desperate. His hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with fury. You can't do this to me, he said, his voice shaking. I gave everything to this company. I sacrificed everything. I met his gaze without flinching. Funny, I said. I was about to say the same thing. Only I wasn't talking about a company. I was talking about us. About 7 years. About everything I gave you while you were giving yourself to my sister. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with all the pain and betrayal that I had been carrying for months. I watched as his anger crumbled, replaced by something that might have been regret. Sera, he said, and his voice was different now, softer, broken. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. What happened with Isolde? It was a mistake. The worst mistake of my life. I wanted to believe him. Some small, wounded part of me that still remembered how it felt to love him wanted to accept his apology and pretend that everything could be okay. But I had spent 7 months becoming someone stronger than that. Someone who wouldn't be destroyed by a few soft words and a remorseful expression. Your mistake, I said quietly, wasn't falling for my sister. Your mistake was underestimating me. I gathered my documents and turned to leave. At the door, I paused and looked back at him one last time. "Oh, and Caelum?" I said. "Congratulations on your engagement." I hear she said yes. Then I walked out, leaving him standing in the wreckage of everything he had built. The aftermath of the acquisition was chaotic and complicated. There were legal challenges, angry investors, and months of restructuring that tested every skill I had developed over my career. But through it all, I remained focused, driven by a purpose that went beyond revenge. I wasn't just destroying Caelum's company. I was rebuilding it, transforming it into something better, something stronger, something that would bear my mark rather than his. The first thing I did was rename it. Draven Technologies became Vance Innovations, a new name for a new era. The second thing I did was fire every single person who had known about Caelum and Isolde's affair and said nothing. There were more of them than I expected. Office whispers and knowing looks that I had been too naive to notice. They could find new jobs elsewhere. I was building a company based on integrity, and there was no room for silent complicity. The third thing I did was hire Thalia as my chief operating officer. She had earned it, not just through her years of friendship and support, but through genuine talent and dedication. Together, we began the process of turning Vance Innovations into a force to be reckoned with. The news of Caelum's ousting spread through the business world like wildfire. Articles appeared in major publications. Social media buzzed with speculation, and suddenly, my name was everywhere. Seraphina Vance, the woman who had brought down her cheating ex-boyfriend and taken his company. It was the kind of story that people couldn't resist. I gave no interviews. I made no public statements. I let my work speak for itself, focusing on turning Vance Innovations into the success it had always had the potential to be. And slowly, steadily, it began to work. Within a year, the company's value had doubled. Within 2 years, it had become one of the most innovative tech firms in the country. The AI solutions that Caelum had always talked about but never quite delivered, I brought in the right talent, secured the right partnerships, and made them a reality. Every success was a small victory. Every milestone was another nail in the coffin of my old life. The life where I had been small and trusting, and so easily betrayed. But success has a way of attracting attention, and not all of it was welcome. It was a Thursday evening, almost 2 years after the acquisition, when Isolde finally managed to corner me. I was attending a charity gala at the city's most prestigious venue, mingling with investors and executives, when I felt a familiar presence at my elbow. "Sera, please, I just want to talk." I had successfully avoided my sister for 2 years. Family gatherings had been carefully navigated, with me arriving late and leaving early, always managing to be in a different room than she was. Our parents had tried to facilitate reconciliation, but I had made it clear that I wasn't ready. Looking at her now, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. She was still beautiful, still charming, still the baby sister I had protected for so long. But she was also the woman who had slept with my partner, who had worn my ring, who had smiled at me across the Christmas table while knowing what she had done. "You have 5 minutes," I said. "Then I'm calling security." We stepped out onto a balcony overlooking the city, the noise of the gala fading behind us. Isolde's hands were trembling as she clutched her champagne glass, and I could see the remnants of tears in her eyes. "I know you hate me," she said. "I know you have every right to. What I did was unforgivable. I'm not here to make excuses. Then why are you here? She took a shaky breath. Because I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not because I want your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. But because you deserve to hear it. You deserve to know that I understand what I did, and I hate myself for it every single day. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, of the selfish calculation that had allowed her to betray me in the first place. But all I saw was genuine remorse, the kind of bone-deep regret that can't be faked. What happened to the engagement? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Isolde laughed bitterly. We broke up 6 months after you took his company. Turns out, when you remove the money and the power and the success, Caelum isn't quite as charming as he used to be. She paused. He blamed me, you know. Said I was the reason you came after him. As if he hadn't made his own choices. For the first time in 2 years, I felt something other than anger when I thought about Caelum Draven. It was a distant sort of satisfaction. The knowledge that his life had crumbled while mine had flourished. But there was something else, too. A weariness that had been building for months. A sense that I had been carrying this burden for too long. I spent 2 years hating you, I said quietly. 2 years, planning and scheming and building walls so high that no one could ever hurt me again. And you know what? It worked. I'm more successful than I ever dreamed. I have more power than I ever imagined. But I'm also lonelier than I've ever been. Isolde's eyes filled with tears. Sera, I'm not saying I forgive you, I continued. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to do that completely, but I'm tired of letting what you did define me. I'm tired of being the Ice Queen. I'm tired of being alone. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'm willing to try, to see if we can rebuild something. Not what we had before, that's gone forever, but maybe something new, something honest. Isolde was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. She reached out and grabbed my hand, and I didn't pull away. I'm so sorry, Sera. I'm so sorry. I know, I said. I believe you. We stood there for a long moment, 2 sisters who had been torn apart by betrayal, taking the first tentative steps toward healing. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but it was a start. Later that night, after the gala had ended and I was alone in my penthouse apartment, I stood at the window and looked out at the city I had conquered. The lights stretched out before me like a million tiny stars, each one representing someone's dreams, someone's struggles, someone's story. My phone buzzed with a message from Thalia. Heard you talk to Isolde. You okay? I typed back, getting there. And it was true. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward instead of running from the past. The anger that had fueled me for so long was finally beginning to fade, replaced by something that felt almost like peace. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, I received a call from my assistant with news that made me sit down heavily in my office chair. Caelum Draven was requesting a meeting. He looked different. That was my first thought when Caelum walked into my office, the same office that had once been his, in the building that now bore my name. The confident, arrogant man who had taken my love for granted was gone. In his place was someone humbled, worn down, diminished in ways that went beyond the physical. Thank you for seeing me, he said, his voice rough. I know you didn't have to. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, keeping my expression neutral. You have 10 minutes. Make them count. He sat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. For a long moment, he just looked around the office, taking in the changes I had made, the evidence of my success displayed on every wall. "You've done amazing things with this company," he said finally. "Things I never could have imagined. Is that what you came here to tell me?" "No." He met my eyes, and I saw something there I had never seen before. Genuine humility. "I came to apologize. Really apologize. Not the desperate excuses I made when you took over. I've had a lot of time to think over the past 2 years, and I finally understand what I did to you." I waited, saying nothing. Caelum took a deep breath. "I used you, Sera. From the very beginning. You were brilliant and driven and connected, and I saw an opportunity. I told myself that I loved you, and maybe part of me did. But the truth is that I loved what you could do for me more than I loved who you were." The honesty of his words hit me like a punch to the chest. I had suspected as much, but hearing him admit it out loud was different. It hurt in ways I hadn't expected. "And Isolde?" I asked. He shook his head. "A distraction. An escape. When things got hard between us, when you were working so much and I was failing so spectacularly, she was easy. She made me feel like I was still the charismatic success I had always pretended to be." He paused. "That's not an excuse." "There is no excuse. I just wanted you to understand that it was never about choosing her over you. It was about me being too weak to face my own failures." I studied him, this man who had once held my heart in his hands and crushed it without a second thought. The anger I had carried for so long felt distant now, like a storm that had finally passed. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "After all this time?" "Because I'm moving away," he said. "I got a job offer overseas. Nothing fancy, just a mid-level position at a tech company that never heard of my failures here. I'm taking it, starting over. And before I left, I needed you to know that I understand what I did. I needed you to know that I don't blame you for any of it. The company, the firing, the public humiliation. I deserved all of it." I leaned back in my chair, processing his words. Part of me wanted to gloat, to remind him of all the ways I had won and he had lost. But that part was smaller now, quieter, drowned out by something that felt like growth. "I spent 2 years hating you," I said quietly, "plotting against you, becoming someone harder and colder just to prove that you couldn't break me. And you know what? I succeeded. I won." Caelum nodded, accepting the statement without protest. "But," I continued, "I'm starting to realize that winning isn't the same as healing, and revenge isn't the same as justice. What you did to me was wrong, Caelum. It was cruel and selfish, and it almost destroyed me. But I don't want to carry this anger anymore. It's too heavy." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying goodbye," I said. "Not forgiveness. I don't think I'll ever be able to give you that, not completely. But closure. The chapter of my life that you were part of is over. I'm ready to move on." Caelum's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He nodded slowly, understanding. "Thank you, Sera." He stood up, straightening his jacket with hands that trembled slightly. "For what it's worth, you deserved so much better than what I gave you. You always did." "I know," I said, "and now I have it." He walked to the door, then paused, looking back at me one last time. "For what it's worth," he said, "you were always the strongest person I knew. I just didn't appreciate it until it was too late." Then he was gone, and I was alone in my office, surrounded by the empire I had built on the ashes of my broken heart. But I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something else entirely, something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt free. 6 months later, I stood on the stage at the annual Business Innovation Summit, accepting an award for Female Entrepreneur of the Year. The audience was filled with the most powerful people in the industry, all of them applauding a woman who had risen from betrayal to become one of the most influential figures in tech. But as I looked out at the crowd, my eyes found the faces that mattered most. Thalia, cheering from the front row, the best friend who had seen me at my lowest and helped me climb to my highest. My parents, tears streaming down their faces, finally understanding that their oldest daughter was going to be more than okay. And Isolde, sitting beside them, clapping with a pride that seemed genuine, the first fragile threads of sisterhood slowly being rewoven between us. I thought about the woman I had been 3 years ago, the one who had stood in a hallway watching her world shatter. I thought about the anger and the pain and the burning need for revenge that had consumed me. I thought about Leonora's warning, about making sure I recognized myself when the winning was done. And I realized that I did recognize myself. Not the naive, trusting woman I had been before, but not the ice queen I had become during my darkest days either. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned that the greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so full and so meaningful that they become irrelevant. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and clear. This award represents years of hard work and sacrifice. But more than that, it represents a journey. 3 years ago, I lost everything I thought I knew. The man I loved, the sister I trusted, the future I had planned. I was broken in ways I didn't think I could survive. The room was silent, hanging on every word. But I learned something in that darkness, I continued. I learned that the things that break us can also remake us if we let them. I learned that pain can become fuel, and betrayal can become motivation. And most importantly, I learned that the only person who gets to define my worth is me. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. So to anyone watching who feels like they're in the middle of their own destruction, who feels like they'll never recover from what someone did to them, I want you to know this. You will survive. You will rise. And one day, you will stand somewhere you never imagined, looking back at the person who tried to break you. And you will realize that they did you a favor. They showed you exactly how strong you really are. The applause that followed was thunderous, but I barely heard it. I was too busy looking at my family, at my best friend, at the life I had built from nothing but determination and sheer stubborn will. He dumped me for my sister, so I fired him and bought his company. And then I did something even better. I became the woman I was always meant to be.